My name is Samantha Wallace. I'm the Deputy Trial Court Administrator for the First Judicial District in the state of Idaho. These questions, some of them were from my own personal experience, and some of them I remember from previous NACM conferences. So with that, the first question that I have is, can you remain friends with colleagues once you become their boss, especially when it comes time to promote someone and your friend is the one that ends up getting promoted? So Erica, I know we had spoken. Very definitive answer, Carl. I like that. Erica, I know we had spoken about this at the ECP meeting. Did you want to talk about this one?
Sure. Yeah. It was kind of ironic that the question that I had in mind was, I was friends with a lot of my fellow clerks when I was a judicial clerk, but then I was promoted to being the judicial clerk supervisor. And so my main question was, what do I do with the people who I've been friends with for like 4 years? And how do I transition from being going to happy hour with them to now being their boss? Because I'm very well aware of what happens at happy hour. It is the venting session, and it is the decompressing. But I know now in my current role, I can't do that anymore. I can pop by and say hi, but I'm not subject to being a part of the happy hour anymore because I'm the one that they want to decompress about, because I'm the one assigning them to all of the awful dockets that they don't want to be in. So it's like I mainly wanted to look at, how do I transition from being their friend to being their boss, but also still maintain that sense of camaraderie and sense of friendship too, because honestly, I am still friends. I still do activities outside of the courthouse with certain people. I went to Comic-Con with somebody. So it's like, how do we have that separation of that work-life balance too, while also me still being able to reprimand or assign them to certain tasks that they might not want to do, and having that professionalism, but also still be able to be their friends sometimes. So yeah, that was more of the question that I proposed yesterday.
I know that many of us may have been to seminars over our careers where some vendor or some facilitator stands up there and tells you how you can do both. You can and ought to be friendly and be able to be open and honest with your employees. But I was never able to be a friend to my employees, and I did try to create a friendly but professional distance. I mean, for a very obvious reason is that you have to be prepared at some point in time to say something to your friend that your friend might take as betraying that person. And you have to be able to do that.
Yeah, I know when I became a lead, I mean, there was 9 people under me. It was very difficult to make that transition. I mean, where, I guess, does one draw the line? Because I would want to go on walks, and I tried to make sure to invite everyone there, but not everyone said yes. So from an outsider's perspective, maybe it looked like I was specifically choosing people to walk with because not everyone joined. Or I think that's the hardest thing, is when you start out as friends and on the same level. I mean, and sometimes it's for years upon years that you're friends with these people, and then all of a sudden you have to take this huge step back when maybe those are your, I don't want to say only friends, but really close friends in life. So
yeah, I mean, I would also add, for the protection of the friend, that we have to avoid the appearance of impropriety. And let's say they are a really stellar employee and this person truly deserves the promotion, but now you're carrying on this friendship where you go to happy hours, you do all those fun things. Everyone else is just looking, saying, well, they're only getting the promotion due to the friendship, when in fact they earned it. So one thing that I would recommend in a case like this is yeah, you would have to take some steps back, establish some boundaries, and just ensure, like to Samantha's point, you are inviting everyone to things that you're inviting your staff to, as well as taking copious notes, really good notes on what everyone's doing. So that way, if they are getting promoted, you can show that they deserve that promotion. Or in fact, let's say they don't get promoted. Maybe the friend thinks, oh, you're only not promoting me so it can look like you're not my friend or something like that. So you want to have the notes either way, because I can see someone making the argument on either side. It's a really tough scenario, and it's a great question that you asked. I really do appreciate just thinking through it.
Yeah, this is Norman. I think Credell, you just summed it up pretty well, of the kind of issues that have been raised, and the toughest nut that Eric put out there was you once were friends in the friends scenario, and now you supervise, and that's the really hardest, I think, to deal with, or if a couple of you put in for the same job and one of you got it and the other one didn't, kind of a scenario. What I always tried to do in my career is that you can't be friends in the full bore, hey, let's go out to drinking and things on the weekend and this, that, and the other kind of stuff. Your families intermingle or whatever kind of stuff. I mean, you have to be very careful with that, but you can still be friendly. And I think that's important to say the sort of gradations of what a friend, or what we mean by friend. I think it's important to be friendly with everybody, and all the staff that you work with and such, and have cordial relations with them. That transition is difficult. I think my advice would be that when somebody makes that transition, that you consider this question and address it head on, and address it with the group you're supervising and saying, look, this is tough for you and me in terms of this transition of how we deal with each other. And there's ethical obligations and whatever that I'm going to have to deal with now, and that you're going to have to deal with. It's both of us. And we as a team need to address these things and make sure that we don't have actual impropriety, or even the appearance of impropriety, that we're not doing things that cause these sorts of friction in the workplace. And so it's a really important question, and thanks for asking it.
We may never get past this slide, but maybe that's okay.
Completely okay.
When I was a young shaver in courts, and I remember I started as a traffic ticket clerk, and I got on the elevator with the state court administrator in Alaska at one point, and this was way back in the 90s, so he's long gone. And I said, hello, good morning, and said something about the weather, and he completely ignored me, like I wasn't even in the elevator, which is really hard to do. Now, maybe he was absorbed in something, who knows? But ever since that day, decades ago, I've sworn to myself I will never be like him. And so I pay attention, and I try to make time, and I really do care about my employees, which is why I struggle more and more with this as the years go by. Some employees here have had tragic stuff happen. It's the stuff that happens to all of us in life from time to time. Car accidents, you lose a kid, just tragic stuff. You lose a parent, medical stuff, and I send them cards, and I really do care about them. But I struggle with this because more and more it feels like, well, I really care about you, and if you've lost a family member, I really, really feel bad for you, genuinely. But I'm not going to come to your house for dinner. And if your kids and my kids have an event at school, I'm not going to sit next to you in the audience because of the appearance it might give. And so I really care about you, but I'm not going to hang out with you at a restaurant or a bar after work. It's just it feels more and more artificial to me, like it's a boundary we've established that I think we really do have to maintain, but it's just this weird schizophrenic. We want to be connected. We want to be empathetic. But I'm not going to go to dinner with you. It's just, it seems to me as I get older, it's just more and more, it's an odd boundary.
Yeah,
I've had a couple
always
instances like that too. Yeah.
with what to do outside. If you're at work, it's pretty easy to maintain that boundary, I think. But yeah, if you get invited to your friend's kid's birthday who you've known all their life, that's where I always struggle too. What's appropriate to do outside of the work on your own personal time.
No, I was gonna say the boundary that I always set with like outside stuff is we don't talk about work. If we start talking about work, no. I just kind of say, nope, that's not what we're here for. So
Well, Norman brought up a really interesting follow-on question, is when this happens and you have a friend or maybe a couple of friends and now you're the supervisor, what is the strategy? I'm going to paraphrase Norman, you can chime in, is that you should address it directly and upfront and probably talk about the elephant in the room and say things are now different and we're not, it's a mistake to assume that everything's going to be the same. There's probably a second point at which time the employee is actually going to realize that they're serious.
You know, judges must struggle with this. Like, I mean, we know judges struggle like every time one gets appointed, somebody will crack a joke at a swearing in ceremony about, oh, now suddenly all my jokes get funnier and I lose my last name and all my professional relationships get a little chillier and a little more distant. And I mean, it must be a struggle that certainly the judges and other work environments deal with all the time too.
Depends on how big the ego of the judge is. I've had ones
Yeah.
who said, hey, great, now I'm king of the hill and you can kiss my black robe.
Uh-huh.
I actually did a volunteer project with one of our judges. And I happened to volunteer with other family members and stuff too. It's like a weekend long event. And I knew she would be coming and I would have to introduce her to like my family members and stuff. And she's like, at this event, I am not Judge so-and-so. I am Kelly. And I'm like, ooh, that feels weird. But it's like, she established that from like the get-go. She's like, I'm not a judge here. We're not talking work. You know, we're here for this event. And here I am just normal Kelly, not Judge so-and-so. So it was kind of nice that she like set that firmly before we even like got to the event. It was still weird to address her by her first name, but I got there in the end.
Hey, performance reviews, good or bad, are they useful?
Yeah,
that's a little-
Is this going to be the way you react to all of these, Carl?
Classic Carl.
I want to do performance reviews, but I have like 43 clerks I supervise, and half of them leave within the year. So as much as, because they're limited duration, they're fresh out of law school, they're meant to be mentored and then move on to be attorneys. So I struggle with the idea of doing performance reviews for somebody who's going to leave in less than 12 months. For those who are like sticking around, maybe, but yeah, I think that's my biggest hurdle that I have to figure out is it worth doing even like a 6-month review for somebody who's going to leave like a month later?
Yeah, I mean, I look at this and say, okay, let's define performance reviews. What do you mean by that? If you mean the annual, once a year, sit down for an hour or whatever, and click through the check boxes and that's it, they're terrible. You shouldn't be doing that. If what you're doing is part of a well thought out system of providing, enhancing communication and giving feedback and all the good things that you should be doing in terms of leadership, and that you're doing regular communication, depending upon the employee, it might be weekly, it might be bi-weekly, certainly no less than monthly, in my opinion. Then it can be very good. And in fact, you should be, in my opinion, you should be doing that. That's what should be done. So it just sort of depends on what we mean by performance reviews. If as I've said, it can be good or bad.
Yeah, without a doubt, I definitely do at least weekly check-ins when somebody first starts and then monthly check-ins after that. So, but it's very informal. It's very, how are things going? What are some issues that you've come across? It's not like the checkbox thing where it's like, oh, we have to do all of this. It's more of a personal, like, what is actually important to you than the checkbox thing.
Yeah, I love that you use the word formal or informal because there's two levels of performance reviewing, and those are two major categories. The formal stuff is things that why are you doing performance reviews? And there's like a half dozen reasons for it. For one, for example, you may have tied it to your compensation system, and so you need documentation that shows what the performance was and whether or not they deserve, a 3-step increase or a 1-step increase or no increase or disciplinary action or whatever, the level of reaction is. You want to defend yourself against legal question, but if you get sued, you need to have your notes, like Credell said back on the previous topic, that you're prepared to defend yourself and to justify what actions you're taking. But the real reason why you're doing it, hopefully, in your organization is to provide that good communication, to be on the same page, to have good goals and objectives that you share and that are specific to the employee. All those things that a good performance system should have. And I guess I'm ranting on. I mean, I've written a bunch on this and taught on this subject, and so this is a topic near and dear to my heart.
Well,
Yeah.
when I wrote this question, you hit upon why I wrote this was documentation. We've run into this where it becomes very difficult to let an employee go if there's no documentation on their poor performance, or good too, as you said, with compensation, but.
I think, to everyone's point today, at the heart of performance reviews are really feedback, employee feedback, as well as documentation for the employer. So I think in some instances this model can work, but I think it's going to depend on the organizational behavior. How does this organization function? If it's one that does annual reviews, the employee shouldn't be surprised when the annual review comes up, because there should be feedback that's constantly and consistently happening. And on top of that feedback, even if it is an informal conversation, sometimes you can follow up with an email just to make sure that everyone is clear on what was discussed. I think written evaluations like this, especially in the beginning, can be very helpful. Like if an employee is starting out in 6 months, it's probably nice to sit down with them, talk about everything, and complete the performance review. But if you have somebody doing their job for 10 years, 20 years, they're pretty much consistent, you may not be getting as much value out of it unless circumstances have changed and your processes are changing a lot. Then it may make more sense. So my overall answer is it depends. But I think overall, positive communication, or even if it's not positive, communication as to how an employee is doing is at the heart of what a performance review is.
Well, let me pose sort of a strategic question for that. And that is, I think with all employees, you're starting out trying to give a performance review, but also be a coach so that the individual will be a better employee and to help that individual along, or all of them. And if that employee doesn't really respond, and then you come back and you try again, whether anybody wants to admit it or not, probably at some point in time, you as a supervisor emotionally change your perspective from trying to coach and help that employee to making book. You may not want to admit it to HR, but at some point in time, you're conducting continual performance reviews and writing them up on an email to follow up. So you've got a trail, because maybe subconsciously you're saying, I'm feeling that this is how this thing's going to end. It's going to end in termination or something like that. And as Samantha said, I need the documentation. But then does that color the kinds of meetings that you're having with that individual anymore, that you're subconsciously now making book instead of you've stopped trying to really help the employee or have the emotional aspect of helping them, and basically saying, I'm checking the box to say that I have informed you of this subpar behavior.
Sure. And I can say I've worked for the courts for 6 years. I have never had one performance review. Now, I assume no news is good news in this aspect, but I've always thought it was a bit odd that I've never had one.
Yeah.
You know,
I've never had one either. So,
South Dakota used to have a personnel rule that says supervisors shall, and they were so universally disliked and not tied to compensation. And they were, if you've got to hammer an employee in a performance review because of really poor performance, usually you'll try to throw them a bone and say, you know, so and so didn't show up Monday through Thursday, but they showed up Friday and they did an okay job. You've got to take an adverse personnel action. The employees would frequently use one tiny positive statement in a performance review and an otherwise really bad performance review as a shield against adverse employment action. And so the supervisors and the administrators in this state thought it was a very mixed thing as to topic as to whether they were worth it, whether they were worthwhile, whether they served a constructive purpose on balance. And so we changed the shall to may in the personnel rules to where they're no longer required. So if you think they're worthwhile and you want to spend a lot of time on it and you want to do it, and the employees sometimes even ask for it, yippee, okay, we'll do one. But we're not, you know, for a 15-year employee who has a relatively consistent job, we're not going to do a personnel evaluation or a performance evaluation sort of just by rote, just to check a box and fill a requirement. So, and I tend to think that's a pretty enlightened approach to take.
And to your example, Peter, I think that managers and supervisors would need to be very careful about trying to just build a case against one particular employee. I mean, if they're not up to standard, I would say make sure that all employees are being held to whatever that standard is. So that way everyone is receiving this, you know, a similar amount of feedback. If you got all this feedback and it's geared towards one person because it looks like you're trying to essentially remove them from the position, it may not be a fair thing to do, because now you're just putting your attention on that one employee instead of showing that you just have a standard for the particular office and the unit. But I do think your scenario probably comes up in many cases, to your point, whether people want to admit it or not.
Is it ethical to use a personal relationship to get promoted in the workplace?
Where's your note?
Where's the
No.
sticky?
Thank you.
I'm sure a lot of us can think of specific examples to this where it's all in who you know. But I guess the question is it ethical?
No. I'm with Carl. It should be work and performance related as to the position and what's required by that position. And the personal side is not particularly relevant, and it's just inappropriate.
I would also agree it is unethical. I mean, I've seen it happen numerous times where, I mean, even if you deserve the job, if you know whoever is choosing you for that position based on a personal relationship, it always seems very unethical and unprofessional.
Well, I think in the discussion of the first question, Samantha, you brought up probably the problem of the vagaries of this situation, as the supervisor might promote someone because of their good performance, and then everyone else in the office says, oh no, they got it because they're friends. People who are doing good, exceptional work as a manager or supervisor tends to gravitate to those people because they can be counted on to get the job done and get it done well and maybe get it done in time. And so they tend to talk to those folks more. Maybe they've got good ideas, but I mean, to the rest of the office, it may start to look like, oh, you're really favoring that individual.
Well, when I wrote this question, I was specifically thinking by personal relationship, meaning you are hanging out with this person outside of work.
Yeah, okay, there's the bright line. You're right.
I'd like to throw a DEI lens on this, because we all have, as I think we all agree that we have our inherent biases, and we tend to hang out with people who we are agreeable to ourselves or like ourselves. We self-segregate in many ways in society and even in the workplace. And this question, if you think about it, raises an issue where in both directions, from the employee up and then the supervisor down, if you want to use the directions, could, if they're not careful, create a real problem with being inclusive in your behaviors and being equitable in your actions. And so I that popped into my head, and I don't know if anybody else thinks that it can color this or cause issues in the DEI sphere if you're not careful.
I see what you're saying, Norman, because let's say that person, especially the call of the question is that you're using the personal relationship to advance. And so let's say you're overlooking someone else who truly has the knowledge, skills, and abilities, or maybe they both can do the job, but the person that really deserves the job is maybe of a different demographic or different abilities. And now they are getting passed over because the friend was promoted. It could raise some DEI concerns, especially with regards to the fairness, or even at worst, some sort of discrimination.
Okay, well, my next question is it ethical to treat each worker differently instead of having the same rules for everyone? For an example, working from home. If you allow specific employees to work from home, maybe because of their personal lives, is that ethical?
I'm very much on the board of circumstantial. So like right now, all of my clerks have the ability to work from home. There's parameters for it. They have to still report to the courthouse every single day. They have to have their docket done. They have to have their judge's permission, and then they can work from home. That's for every single clerk. However, I have a clerk who recently broke her leg, and she was on paid leave to heal. And now she is able to work, but her doctor says she can only work from home. So that is a circumstance where we have been accommodating to her because of her healing her broken leg. And we've worked with her where she can work from home the entire time instead of coming into the courthouse. So I feel like it's like, but that's like a circumstantial thing. And it's totally honed in on making it feasible for that one clerk. But also all of the other clerks are very aware of it and are very understanding of that situation. And we were very upfront with, this is what's going to happen. This is how she's going to do it. And this is how we're going to work with her on it. And knowing that she will come to the courthouse eventually. So it's like, is one of those situations where it's like, we want to have that blanket rule, but in circumstances where somebody breaks their leg, let's be flexible, you know?
Sure. But you
Yeah.
still
Samantha-
offer that to everyone else, though. Not obviously
Exactly.
permanently, but they still are
Yes.
allowed to. So I guess
Exactly.
My answer to this is yes. I mean, equitable does not mean equal. That you have to
Yeah.
treat everybody exactly the same. I mean, it gets down to a situational leadership mode of you have to treat each individual worker appropriately and in terms of their unique needs and situation and performance. And they're not robots and having the exact same rules that everybody has to do the exact same thing and have the exact same parameters to me is poor leadership. And I don't think you have to, the code of conduct requires you to do that.
There's a supply and demand aspect to this too. And I think many of us have seen this. Right now, remote work, hybrid work is on the wane in a lot of courts, and courts are asking or demanding that all of their employees get back to the courthouse so that they can be better managed. And yet, where do we see that? IT workers, IT folks, because there is such a premium on good IT help that many times you have an employer you're hiring for an IT position, they get to call the shots. They can sit there and say, no, I'm going to work hybrid. If you don't want me, that's fine. I've got a interview this afternoon with Intel. And courts often make accommodations to those folks just to entice them to work for government over the private sector.
But is there an ethical question there?
Well, the ethical thing is they're treating the employee differently. And everybody else in the office knows that so-and-so, because their tech person gets special treatment.
Is that, I mean,
And
but you're
there's-
using the term special treatment. Does that mean
It is special
inappropriately treatment?
It's-
Or
it's
you can
special treatment because they get
you
to
can give
work from
somebody
home.
special treatment because of their circumstances, and there's nothing wrong with it.
The circumstances are that they just get to call the shots because they know that their skills are so valuable.
You know, I have an easier time swallowing that distinction driven by market circumstances, like IT skills, than I do life circumstances. For example, during COVID, when all the schools closed and the daycares closed, we had not much choice. We had to grant what we called COVID leave to any employees with kids because they had nowhere to put the kids. If you didn't have kids, though, we compelled you to come to work. And so the kids, no kids thing during COVID was, I really struggled with that one because, is that a fair distinction? Is it fair to have that expectation of some employees and not others, simply driven by life circumstance?
So I can say that, Carl, your example specifically affected me because I don't have children and was
I was
told
about to say
I
the
had to
same
be at
thing.
work. I was not allowed to work from home because I did not have children.
Mhm.
And I mean, COVID was a scary time for everyone. And so I had to assume more risk specifically because I didn't have children. So I was treated very differently and was not given that option. So actually, when I asked this question, that was my personal experience that I was thinking of.
I have
Yeah,
a question.
know-
For me to make a distinction if it's ethical or not being treated differently, I would have to go back to like what Erica said, the circumstances. For example, what if your job directs you that you have to be present? Let's say an administrative assistant position, or someone that is the receptionist, and you have to be there in the office because you're the one that are greeting people that come in, and your job position when you were hired already told you have to be at the office present, let's say 8 to 5, and that takes you out of the same treatment of saying, okay, some employees have a flexible time. But if your job position already is telling you, well, there's some things that you will not be able to do, I don't think in the question that makes the difference. So going back to that question and agreeing with Erica, it's partly also circumstantial upon what your job position requires from you. And going back to if it's ethical or not, treat each worker differently, I don't know if I would be comfortable saying it's ethical or not, treating them differently. Maybe the rules should apply to everyone in the same situation or circumstance. I don't know if that's something that gives you a different way of thinking of what is ethical or not.
All right. Thank you, everyone, for participating. We will see you in January for our next ethics committee meeting.
Thanks for joining us today. The Question of Ethics Conversation is a regular segment on ethics, courts, and court administration. Today's episode will be available on our website, in the Court Manager Journal, on the Court Leader website, on YouTube, Facebook, iTunes, LinkedIn, and on Twitter. Become part of the conversation. Join us live when we hold the Question of Ethics Conversation. Episodes are held immediately following the monthly NACM Ethics Subcommittee meeting on the third Thursday of the month. Check the NACM Committee webpage for the schedule and Zoom link. If you have questions, comments, or ideas for future conversations, email us. Our address is ethics@nacmnet.org. Did you hear an interesting comment by one of the panelists that you would like to listen to again, but you don't want to search the entire episode to find it? The Additional Resources section on the webpage has a question time marker sheet. Find the discussion question on the sheet, and next to it is the time that question was asked. You can quickly fast forward to that time and listen to the panel's comments. Remember, if you don't have time to watch an episode, you can always listen to the audio version. Listen in your car or on the bus, on your way to or from work. You never have to miss an episode. I'm Pete Kiefer, and on behalf of our guests, the Court Leaders website, and the National Association for Court Management, thank you, and have a great day. The views, information, and opinions expressed during this episode are solely those of the host and the individual presenters. They do not necessarily represent the position of the National Association for Court Management.